Hi, I'm Tara Woodlee. I'm president at Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence. And I'm happy to welcome you to our Through the Eyes of Survivors podcast, where we're working to shatter the myths and misconceptions about domestic violence and interpartner abuse. Would you please welcome me and join, with our guest today, KP Lovejoy. KP, after witnessing pornography's destructive links personally at the age of 8 years old, which opened the door to a lifetime of sexual exploitation that nearly ended KP's life in death, and through God's love and redemption, she has become a lifelong overcomer with 20 plus years of nonprofit and federal service. KP has created an organization called Porn Free Colorado from her passion surrounding pornography and its links to human trafficking. And then our other guest is my husband, Jim Woodlee. And during Jim's time as a correctional officer for the state of Texas is when he was introduced through the institution he worked in to trafficking and traffickers. After his service from the Department of Corrections, Jim was recruited to lead Black Ops teams to recover trafficked victims and minors across international borders. Now he's currently employed as a truck driver for Dot Foods, but he still insists on assist in educating about trafficking in the truck driving industry. So thank you both for being here today. So, here we're ending January, which is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and we're beginning to kick off February's Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. Through the Eyes of Survivors has decided to kind of shed some light on both topics and the consequences that they have bringing them together, focusing on teens and why they're targeted by most human traffickers. Statistics show that human trafficking statistics are mostly successful for victims between the ages of 11 and 16, when the human brain is still developing. And so in this podcast, we'd like to equip teens and parents so that they can spot the signs of trafficking and get help as soon as possible. So I guess we'll start the conversation off with KP. What would you describe, as grooming as a definition, really, and what it entails, and why teens are so frequently targeted?
Well, thank you so much, Tara, for the invitation to be here today. It's really kind of something you highlighted already, is that the vulnerability of the fact that a child's brain isn't really fully developed yet. And so teens are still in this phase of creating their own identity and breaking away from their parents and focusing more on their peer group. And groomers really prey on vulnerabilities. So they look at what types of weaknesses might somebody have that would lead them to be open to something like trafficking. And so when they're establishing the trust and the relationship with their potential victims, they're looking for all these vulnerabilities. And that brain, I always call it all gas, no brakes. So your prefrontal cortex is not really fully developed yet. And so when, teens are thinking about relationships and, the excitement that is often related, if somebody approaches them in a grooming capacity, they are not fully aware of how to identify, is this real, or is this, somebody who actually intends to harm me? And so traffickers know that, and they prey upon that. And they really look for, how can I spot my victim, and how can I build that trust so that I can start breaking down those barriers of those healthy relationships that a child ideally has. And as we know, not every child has healthy, trusting relationships around them. So they find themselves even more vulnerable to being groomed.
Right. And I mean, the the ages 11 to 16, I mean, a lot of times it starts a whole lot earlier than that, correct?
Yeah, in the work that I do, I mean, I've talked to parents who have kids as young as 4 and 5 who've reached out to me saying that their child was groomed playing simple video games like Roblox or playing Fortnite, Overwatch, these types of games that are super popular. And, you know, every child has access to this technology where most of the grooming is happening online. You know, when we were growing up, it used to be stranger danger, but now it is the teens think they know this person and it's a friend, or it may be even somebody who pretends to be a classmate at their school, using an avatar of somebody that looks appealing to them that may be relatively in the same age or maybe even a little bit older, but it's often not the person that is really behind the screen, behind the other side of the internet, if you will.
Right. And Jim, what would you say as far as like that you'd like to add about grooming and why teens are targeted?
Well, I saw through the prison system the young inmates that would come in on occasion. Uh, the actual predators in those situations would look at those young men and see an opportunity just because they were younger and didn't have the experience and the life's knowledge that comes along with it. So what I saw in that is that there's a process that they go through to groom these young people, and to be able to have any effect on it at all, those of us around the young, we've got to step up and look out for them. So, what you're asking right now is what I've seen on that level. I've seen that in the prison systems. I saw, as a truck driver, I have young girls come up to my truck, knock on the door, and say, "Mister, do you want a party?" Some of them as young. I think the youngest one's ever knocked on my door was 12 years old, and it turned out her daddy was a preacher, and I was able to talk her into going home. But she was scared to death to go home because there was a guy in a car sitting out there watching,
Right.
making her do what she was doing. And when she found out somebody would help her, it became a different story. So, it's a matter of identifying when this is happening, and we all have a responsibility. The media portrays it as our social responsibility. I think it's more than that. I think we have a duty that we're called on by our nation, by our God, by everything on this earth that demands we protect those young and innocent, because people want to say innocent is dumb. It's not. They're smart enough to go against their parents' wishes and find ways to do what they want without their parents allowing it. And if they're that smart, they can get themselves in a lot of trouble.
Right. So you touched on a little bit. So let's kind of, delve into that a little bit more about the stages, of grooming. And I know in different things, when you research the subject, they talk about that there's 6 stages. I imagine there's probably more than that, but starting with targeting victims. So, KP, when they start to target victims, let's talk about that. How do they target victims, and what do they use in order to target them?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think all parents and teens really need to be aware that the targeting is really strategic. I mean, if you think about this multi-billion-dollar industry, it is a business model. And
Yes.
the traffickers have very strategic objectives, and they know who is going to make a good victim, if you will. And I would like to comment on 2 aspects of this. First of all, media messaging, whether you're a boy or a girl, which I hope we touch on the fact that, as Jim mentioned, a lot of boys are being groomed into trafficking now, and it is
Yes.
really I would say often neglected population. We do spend a lot of time focusing on girls, but the boys being groomed is a different topic we could spend a whole day on right there. But
Right.
the idea that a trafficker is spotting vulnerabilities, and so they're looking for weaknesses in a child's identity. So, for example, if a child has a very strong self-esteem, very loving community around them, a trafficker is less likely to find them as a vulnerable victim. The complex conversations I've had with former pimps and traffickers have said that, you know, they can go to any mall in any city in any US state and they can spot the victims just by the way they carry themselves. So they're typically, if there's somebody that's surrounded by a peer group of friends, acting very confident, they're probably not going to find that as an ideal victim, versus the one that, you know, kind of loner, maybe hanging by themselves, very insecure. They're typically going to spot them as more vulnerable. And then another thing is that they prey on this media messaging of how every young child wants to be loved, wants to be seen, wants to be valued. And so specifically with relation to girls, if that pimp approaches a girl in a mall, for example, and tells her, "You're so pretty," and she hangs her head down and shyly responds, "Oh, I don't, nobody's ever told me that before. He's got her. Bingo." That's what she wants to hear. And he's going to start feeding her with those compliments. And that's when that Romeo pimp will come in and start to pretend he's her boyfriend and he's so attracted to her, he's going to take care of her. And this is where these other stages of grooming will come in. I know you mentioned the 6, but one of the ones that I've been really familiar with working with law enforcement is the IRAE, building in the intrigue, and then you build the rapport, and then you have your attraction, and then you have your enslavement. So I really like the simplified version of, it's just really building that relationship by finding what's going to intrigue that child to fall into your trap, if you will.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I like that. So what is it called again?
It's IRAE. So
Okay.
IRA.
Yeah.
I'll probably say it wrong. Intrigue.
Yeah.
Intrigue is I, rapport is R, attraction is A, and then enslavement is your E. And it happens just as quick as you could imagine. So
Absolutely. So it sounds like for human trafficking, some of the tactics in order to target a victim is same as what we experience here in like domestic violence situations. It's not much different, really. It's just they're targeting the young. It sounds like. So, Jim, what would you add about how they target victims?
One of the things that we discovered when my team was bringing little girls back from Mexico, I know there's a lot of trafficking that goes on from other countries into the United States, but what I was involved in was bringing back some that were taken out of the United States into Mexico. And one of the things that we discovered was each of these young people that we talked to would come back and say, you know, had I had a better relationship with my parents, I could have talked to them about this ahead of time. And what we discovered in all of that was that those people who are grooming and who are preying on the young and the defenseless, they're preying on them because one of their first statements when they talk to them is, you know, they'll say something to the effect of, you know, when I was at home before I got away from them, my parents were so strict. And 9 out of 10 times, if the kids come back and say, my parents are real strict too, and I hate it, then they will go ahead and try to promote, you know, get a familiarity on that. But if they go, well, my parents are strict, but they do it because they love me and they care about me, so I'm going to let them know, that didn't happen real often with young people. But on the case that it did, kids that were approached are pretty much left alone at that point. That scares a groomer away because they don't want things coming into the light. that next stage is that I'm not as technical as you are, but
Yes.
that next stage in the grooming is where they jump into a trust seeking
Yes.
mode, and they've got to build trust with that child. And then after they build trust, they build this dependency. And that dependency means that child is dependent on them for their emotional status, for whether it be drugs or whether it be, if they're from a poor area and this person is giving them money so they can do fun things.
Right.
It's a dependency. Then once you pass that dependency stage, this child is already starting to develop into they think they love this person. And all of a sudden something happens that displeases that person, and there's a fear stage involved in there. They have to have that fear stage to be able to promote things further. And usually starting out, it's verbal, something to scare that child into believing that, something could happen to them. And then they turn it. And they turn it in a way that makes them sound like the salvation to that child. So it's, like I said before, it's an ongoing process. And I'm sure Ms. Lovejoy is a whole lot better at putting it in technical language than I am. I'm just no, backwoods cowboy, but it's a process, and it's a step by step that these people use. They manipulate it to their own purposes. They move it around, and they do it in their own order, what works for them. But what you're dealing with is pure evil. And these people that do this to our children, they are evil from the word go. And once they gain that trust, and once they institute that fear, then they've got two things. They've got a young lady that thinks they trust this person wholeheartedly, that thinks they love this person wholeheartedly, and they're afraid to displease this person.
Right.
That's a recipe for a disaster, even for an adult woman, much less a teenage girl.
Right. And what about with the young men, Jim? Is it the same kind of level there with the
young men?
grooming?
I was at a prison setting, seeing
Right.
that. I was an officer with the Texas Department of Corrections. And during the time period that I was working there, what I observed was that there's more fear involved in that. There is the dependency, but the love doesn't necessarily have to be there. It has to be looking for protection, looking for dependency on somebody else, and then fear has to be there. You get those three items with a young man, that can overturn all of what they know to be right and wrong.
Right.
It depends on the person and their own emotional status. And even in the prison systems, they look for certain types of individuals. And usually it's the young, or usually it's somebody that really doesn't understand what's happening to them in there, or how things operate on the inside. Because there's rules on the inside that are separate from what we see on the outside. And if they don't understand that, it's obvious to everybody from the very first day. And if they're gonna prey on those young men in the prison systems, they're gonna do it within the first month that person's there. If they make it a month, the possibility of that happening is a lot slimmer.
Right.
But if they get there, that first month is so dangerous for the young.
Wow, that's really eye-opening. So they make themselves valuable, right? So they gather the information, they make themselves valuable. And I heard both of you talking about various ways, such as gifts or emotional support. What about the way social media is structured today? How does that play a role? How deep does the rabbit hole really go when you talk about social media and our children? KP, would you touch on that?
Yes, for sure. This is one of my most, I would say, enlightening areas, because I do work on a federal and state legislation to protect children against sexual exploitation online. And so you may be familiar with several lawsuits happening right now related to Twitter, Instagram, Pornhub,
Yes.
these types of websites where they're grooming children online, and then they're creating child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, of these children. And they're doing it through that relationship, through the trust, through the building of that bond, as Jim mentioned earlier. And then what they're doing is they're pretending in most cases to be perhaps an attractive member of their class. So they might say, "Hey, I think you go to my school," and they'll put an avatar of somebody that looks like it might be the same age. And this is, I see a lot of this with the boys, is it may be pretending to be an attractive cheerleader at their school of the opposite sex. And I think you're really cute. Send me a picture. And then once that picture changes hands, is completely out of control of that child. And then these kind of things happen where sextortion starts taking place, where it's like, "No, I have what I want. And if you
Yes.
don't do what I'm telling you to do, I will either threaten you with sharing this with your school, sharing it with your parents, or asking you for money," and these kinds of things. And so these children are falling into traps online through social media and through even just texting or playing video games, as I mentioned earlier, where any type of device, any type of app that has a messaging function on it is, I would hate to say, a playground for the traffickers, because at any given time, the FBI recommended that there are 750,000 predators online looking for children, and this stat is over 10 years old. So they haven't updated it, but this is frightening if you think about being a parent and giving a child a smart device, or not having. So one of the things our organization really wants to stress to parents is help your child develop internal filters, so that they know the difference between a trusted adult, and they know what grooming and these types of things at an age appropriate level, and help them understand, so that before they're approached by the trafficker or any type of predator online, they are aware of the space that they're walking into. Because we would not tell our child to go play in traffic on a highway. This is kind of what we're doing with social media, is we're just letting our children go out there, and they're predators constantly scouring, looking for vulnerabilities, and they don't care that it's your child. They don't care that they have a heart and feelings, and and they don't care about all the complex trauma that's associated with removing those images, or having those images out there and shared and monetized, which, as we know, the definition of trafficking. If you are talking about force, fraud, or coercion, all of that goes out the window when it's a minor child being sexually trafficked, because if the child's under 18 and there's monetization on any type of sexual content, that is by itself, that is trafficking. So it's terrifying when we think about social media and how rampant it is. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children every year does a report on the numbers of child sexual abuse material, and the last report they did was 2021. They haven't quite finished 2022 numbers yet, but there were almost 30 million reports of child sexual abuse material, and that includes 85 million files, whether they be pictures or videos of minor children, in sexually inappropriate situations, or having, any type of enticement or unsolicited obscene material sent to them, child sex tourism, all these kinds of things. So that's just to put a number in your mind and try to think of, that's somebody's child. That is frightening when we think about the scope.
Oh my, yes, absolutely. And you saying in that one set of statistics, it's 10 years old. 10 years ago, social media wasn't even, we didn't even have all the apps or the things, it was like maybe Facebook and, Twitter. And now you have all these Snapchats and everything else that number, is amazing, incredible to hear now, but to know that it's 10 years ago, wow, it's frightening. It really is frightening. So I know that they like to use social media. We were talking about that, but also isn't part of the grooming techniques. I know Jim can talk about this some too, about how they use pornography to make these things normal for these children, these sexual acts and what they're seeing and things like that. So, Jim, how much does that play a role?
Well, it plays a huge role. The pornography industry has its own niche for child pornography, and there are millions made in that niche, and people you would never believe wind up in that industry. People that are working in positions of government, people that are working. There was a bust at one of the prison systems that a lot of high-ranking officials got involved. They were caught up with some gang members and creating child pornography from their children. I actually helped with some of that investigation, but it is incredible the amount of falsehoods, lies, deception that goes on. I mean, these people, I'm old school. I would think you'd be able to look at a child molester and that's a child molester. You can tell by the way he looks. You can't. He can look like your brother, your sister, your mother, your daddy, your pastor, your politician. He can look like anybody, and he can carry on a life that looks so normal that you can't see it. What Miss Lovejoy said earlier, matter of fact, everything she said earlier, I so much agree with. I would add, as a father who's been through a daughter that was murdered, that you think that, oh, nobody had touched my kid. I mean, I'm 6'2", weigh 270 pounds. Nobody's going to touch my kid or my grandbaby. The guy that killed my daughter, me and Tara were told he was scared to death of me, but he still killed her.
That's right.
It didn't stop her. I mean, it didn't stop him. I would advise any parent out there where social media is concerned, your child doesn't have a right to privacy, not from you. You're the parent.
Right.
Look at their phone. Make it a habit of looking at their phone. Look at their phone when you know there's nothing on there. Get that child comfortable with you looking at their phone and sharing in their lives, because that's a way you can share together. Once they get comfortable enough knowing you're going to look at their phone every time you turn around, then all of a sudden you're going to see something, and all of a sudden a discussion comes up you wouldn't have had with that child on a good level.
Right.
And on the horrible occasion that you find something that involves, grooming, trafficking, child pornography, on that occasion, then you're doing what you're supposed to do. You're protecting your child. You're not being bad to them. You're not being a terrible parent. You're doing what a parent does. And if you don't do that, then you're leaving your child vulnerable, because we can teach these children all we want to identify predators, to know the situations that they shouldn't be in. And in the end, they're still children. They're still teenagers. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I was a teenager and a child, if I would have had to pay the price for every mistake I ever made, I wouldn't be here right now. These kids make mistakes. We've got to walk the walk with them and teach them everything we can. Just like Ms. Lovejoy said, we got to teach them everything we can about identifying, but then walk alongside them looking for those threats.
Right. Because
Situation
sometimes, yeah, sometimes what's being presented to them is so skewed, it's that they can't see what is the monster really in front of them. And if we're not there to help them discern that, it takes a lot of discernment that children just don't have the experience to have. So,
Yep. You may have to fight your own child to save their life. And if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. You know, I stepped back at one point when I really thought I should kill this guy that was after my daughter. And I stepped back and didn't do it. I've regretted it ever since. No, I'm not saying ever go out and kill the guy. That was a wrong thought on my part. What I'm saying is, if you identify that, get some authorities involved at that
right.
time. Don't just step back.
Right, exactly. And KP, do you have some thoughts adding to what Jim said as well?
Well, I'm so heartbroken for your loss. First of all, that is something no parent should ever go through.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking. And I hear these stories. I don't know the circumstances related to your daughter, but I hear stories all the time of good kids falling into a bad relationship and not really understanding. And I think we talked about social media, the idea of the media influence on a young child, on what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and this idea of one of the former porn producers that I've had the pleasure of getting to know over the years said that these girls come to the set camera ready. They know what it means to be a porn star, and they know that the society that we live in with the Kim Kardashians of the world and the I could name so many names of young role models who are using their sexuality to get what they want, and they're setting a young child up, whether it's a boy or a girl, to understand that this is how it works and this is what it means to be sexual, and this is incredibly dangerous, because when the media messages are teaching a young woman how to be pornified, and that your sex appeal is your value, it's so easy for the predators and the traffickers to spot that and to say, okay, you get how this, a lot of times they refer to trafficking as the game. You get how the game works, and these girls and these boys will fall right into the trap because they're told on a regular basis through media messaging that your sexuality is your identity. And so when we don't, as parents, as trusted adults, when we don't speak truth into that child and let them know that, yes, you are a sexual being, at the same time, that is not what defines you, and let them know that their purpose is not to be a sex object, and that their purpose is, the way that they were wired and designed is so much more than how they look or how they perform in bed and these kinds of things. So I think that media messaging is just such a huge detractor for what parents are trying to do and raise their children. So for every negative message that media is presenting, parents have to, 5-10 more messages of, no, your worth is not your sexuality. And so I think, as you and Jim both mentioned, parents have such a tough job, because we've got their peers they're listening to music, they're listening to media messages on what they're seeing on social media. And we know, if you haven't watched the documentary, The Social Dilemma, they speak about this in here, about how the media understands how important messages are. And they understand that these young brains, that they're still developing, they understand how to market to them in a way that gets them to see what they want them to see, believe what they want them to believe, and the parents kind of go by the wayside. So the tougher the job the parents have. So I think what you both mentioned is so important.
Right. And a lot of times they use other children to help recruit the children, right? So, because I remember a time with one of our daughters, she was 14, and an 18-year-old girl told her, stripping would be a good way to pay for college. And that young lady went from ending up stripping to pornography to, she was, trafficked in some ways. So um, I think people don't realize sometimes some of this comes from other children bringing in, because they have been indoctrinated into it to where they feel like it's fine. And then they bring other children into it with them, and that they use other children as a recruitment tool, correct? So,
Yeah,
Jim,
definitely. I was just going to let Jim speak to,
yeah.
to that. Go ahead,
Jim.
When the moral integrity of a society degrades to the point that we don't protect our own children, then we have an issue. When that happens, children look for other authority figures. Sometimes it's a kid 2 years older than them, to get their ideas on morals, on even how they dress, how they talk to guys or girls at their own age. If we let our own morals, and I'm speaking for fathers out there right now, but if fathers don't stand up and create a moral environment for our daughters, then how are they going to know if they're being told right or wrong by a young man that's 3 years older than them, or a young woman that's 3 years older than them? It's just not going to happen. And our society is changing in a way that our media promotes things that 20 years ago would have just not been acceptable. And if you don't think these kids are seeing this, I've got granddaughters that are very young, 6 and 8, and sometimes they absolutely shock me with some of the things they say, not even understanding what they're saying, but they saw it on TV. And sometimes it's on kids' shows that they see it. Because Tara and their mommy are very good about, if the kids come up with something like that, where did you hear that? And they get that to where they can't see it. But it amazes me that a kid can watch a cartoon and come back and ask you questions you wouldn't expect.
Right. Absolutely. Go ahead, KP. What were you going to say?
And that was such a great point. I would add to that the idea of sexualizing our children, and there's a targeted effort to do this. I mean, I've seen in kids stores, for young little girls, sometimes you can't even find a one-piece bathing suit anymore. And it's like, why does a 4-year-old need to wear a bikini? And, or they'll have a logo of a Playboy bunny on a t-shirt, and they think it's cute and they think it's fun. And they're normalizing what Dan Allender referred to as what I really love is this idea of a pedophilic drift. And so it's basically we're normalizing this idea that children are sexual beings. And you're seeing it all across, not just here in the US, but across the globe, where this idea that we're trying to lower ages of consent, or we're trying to make it, in California just passed legislation where it's not a crime to have sex with a child that's 11 if you're, I want to say 18, 19. And these are just frightening, that back to that pedophilic drift where we're starting to normalize the sexualization of children. And so as specifically as Jim mentioned, fathers of daughters, if we don't have that strong bond from a dad to a daughter, the first relationship that is the most pivotal and most important for a young woman to develop her identity is her relationship with her father. And if she does not have a strong relationship, she's going to look for that elsewhere, and then enter the trafficker, who's going to come with all these promises of love and affection, and I'll take care of you. And he'll even go, which I know you know this, a lot of pimps will be referred to as daddy. there's a
Oh,
very
yeah.
specific reason they do that, is because they're trying to oust the father figure from that relationship and make that child understand that I will take care of you. And it doesn't matter if I'm taking care of you by making you have repeated rapes and give me all your money and I'll beat you if you don't meet your quota. These are normalizations of terrible behavior in the trafficking world that we see on a regular basis. And again, it's not just the girls, but the boys. If they don't have a
Yeah.
strong identity and a strong relationship, a trafficker can easily take advantage of that vulnerability as well. So I think you both made really great points about that.
Thank you. And the after effects of it. I know with domestic violence, it seems to have a lot of similarities. Again, the PTSD that can develop, self-esteem issues, which are usually there to start with, but they're magnified now, right? And it creates a trauma bond with the trafficker and stuff like that. But I imagine with these younger minds, as hard as it was for me, going through abuse from my first marriage to overcome that, what kind of, could you touch on what kind of special, how much harder is it for children to really, does it ingrain them in a way that it doesn't really in adults on having to heal or how they're bonded? I hope you get what I'm trying to say. So, KP.
Yeah, I love that question, because the trauma bond is so misunderstood. And I think, especially when we go back to the fact that the child's brain hasn't fully developed, when we specifically, if we're talking about sex trafficking, and we know that there's multiple forms of trafficking that also occur, but when we're talking about specifically with sex trafficking of children, the idea that the most intimate part of your identity, of your body, of your soul has been cheapened and abused and misused. And then oftentimes, with the case with children being trafficked, there's typically going to be documentation through photos and videos that are shared on sites that the child has no control over. And so if you think about, when you talk about domestic violence or intimate partner violence, when you've been raped,
Right.
and you have to deal with the aftermath of that, and it's one time, and then hopefully the perpetrator is brought to justice, and then it's over, and then you can start your process of healing. That is one kind of trauma. With sex trafficking, it's oftentimes that the documentation of your rape or your multiple rapes or your gang rapes has been captured on film. And now it's been, every time that video is shown, that child is re-traumatized. So
Right.
a lot of these survivors and these amazing human beings that are trying to pick up the pieces of their life are dealing with the complex trauma of, can I even go out in public anymore? Because if somebody recognizes me as that person in that video, then what? And so this
Right.
is where we enter into this nasty this nasty world of now you have all these lawsuits of that kids were being trafficked, and places like Twitter or places like Instagram said, oh, that doesn't violate our terms of service, even though it's a child. Or you have kids that were sold on Pornhub, and they fought for years to get those images taken down, and nobody would do anything about it. Now, how many millions of times has somebody seen that child being raped or that child being exploited in multiple ways? And that child is having to put all these pieces back together, and then knowing that they might not ever go away. It's this complex trauma. The healing piece is so much more intricate there with, and thankfully I just learned the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has just launched a new site that is actually called Take It Down. And if any child has nudes that are out there, or they have any type of sexually inappropriate images or videos of them, they can do a hash, and they can actually track those photos and get them taken down, because they'll automatically alert that was a minor child, and that needs to come down. So this is great that we can use technology to fight technology because so much of the harm is done in the online space, and now we're really going after these predators using their own methods by using technology. So it's kind of a long answer to your question.
No.
I just learned about this website on Friday, and I thought I gotta share this. This is
no,
great
that's
news.
Great. That's wonderful. Yeah. I know we have seen over the years, Jim and I, with the work we're doing. Jim, you can talk about this. How even it can be where we see young women, it's their own husbands or boyfriends that get a hold of them at a very young age, can be even 16 or whatever, and get them married, and then they traffic them, and they have children with them, and they'll traffic them even in the truck stops and stuff. And so the bond there is even more unique in that aspect. You want to talk about that some?
Yeah, because it becomes even more repulsive when you consider a young lady gets married. She just turned 18 years old. She's trafficked by her own husband. She has 3 different kids. She doesn't even know if all 3 of those kids are by the same man, or if any of them are even by her husband.
Right.
But her husband signed the birth certificate. So if she divorces him, there's a very good chance he's going to get partial custody of her kids. So it's another way of locking her into a terrible situation. And then if she does get away from him, he's got pictures, he's got videos. And in so many cases, they bombard social media with those. They want all of her friends to see, all of her family. At that point, they try to destroy that woman physically and emotionally, and destroy her not only with their families, but in the eyes of her own children.
Right.
And then you take all of that together and consider the baggage that she carries with her from all of that. If 10 years down the road, she does find a decent man and gets married, then there are things that happened in her past that are going to affect the relationship she's in now. And none of it is her fault. And any of you ladies that have been through this out there that are listening, I want to tell you right now, if you were trafficked, if you were done wrong by a man sexually or physically in any way, this is not your fault. You didn't bring it on yourself. The devil affected that man, and he did evil against you. You're the victim. You're not the reason that this happened to you. Nothing bad you ever did in your life caused this to happen to you. Sorry, I had to.
Well, they carry a lot of, guilt and shame, and they're bombarded with that this is all a part of their fault. And I think it's hard to process, even as an adult, let alone as a child. So how do we stop this kind of grooming? I know that KP, you're involved in different legislation and stuff. What would you say as to what we can do as a society to help stop this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the idea that we are constantly learning new information and sharing this podcast, sharing the information, sharing the Take It Down website. Just when we keep the information to ourselves, it's not helping the problem. In a sense, it's making it worse, because if I know something and I don't tell somebody, the next person I run into might be a vulnerable person who could be, being trafficked, that I don't even know about because I haven't shared what I just learned today. So I think that the more that we can educate ourselves in our communities, get involved in your local human trafficking task force. Most every community has one. And if you don't have one in your town, maybe in your county, or at least at your state level, and then of course there's federal level, like put the human trafficking task force hotline in the human trafficking hotline in your cell phone. So if you see somebody, like Jim mentioned, at a truck stop, I was driving back from Texas to Colorado one time, and I saw a girl at a gas station, and she was standing with a sign, like she needed food, and she kept looking over, and I was watching, because it was March. It was definitely not shorts weather, and she was wearing a tank top and shorts and not dressed for the weather. And
Right.
I could tell that something wasn't right, and she was way too young to be out there by herself, and she kept looking over at a car that had 3 grown men in it. And every little bit of food she got, she took over to them, and she came back and she got more. And so I had that. Thankfully, I had the human trafficking hotline phone number in my phone, called them right away. And I made sure that she was good and she was taken care of. By the time somebody got to her, I didn't leave until the law enforcement arrived. But, just stuff like that, or, like Jim, Truckers Against Trafficking, being aware that there are resources that target those specific populations where trafficking is so rampant, and just sharing that information, because, one person can make a huge difference in the community that you're part of.
Absolutely. And Jim, you want to touch on that too?
Oh, yeah. One of the institutions you're talking about is called Truckers Against Trafficking. It's a great organization. Anybody that's out there just starting to drive a truck, that's the first thing you need to do. They will not only give you hotline numbers, they'll give you stickers to put on your truck, let people know, to where, some of them that are involved in that, they'll see those stickers and they'll just walk away. They won't even knock on your door. Some of them will walk up, knock on your door, and ask you for help. That's a huge thing when that happens. The other thing is, because of what you touched on, calling and reporting these things. So many of my generation, we've been taught all of our life, snitches get stitches, don't snitch, all of that. Protecting a child is not snitching. Protecting a woman, if you're a man, no matter what, protecting a woman, if you're a man, is not snitching. That's doing what you're designed to do. So, don't ever think that calling and reporting something. I mean, my wife can tell you, I will even look at her and go, no, I can handle this myself. I don't need a cop here. But I'm not calling a cop on this guy or whatever else, But when it comes to a child or a woman, throw that out the window. That's not snitching. It's doing your duty. And you have the duty. And men have forgotten, or my generation. We talk about these young people and how crazy they are with all the social media and the stuff that they do that we couldn't have gotten away with. Well, who do you think caused that? My generation did, not theirs. They're doing what we've. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can start even on smaller level, because I know, Jim, you even just, within your own company, talk about this. So, you're the voice for this within your own company at your own hub. And so it doesn't have to be that you have to be a part of like some national organization to be a part. You can start within your own communities, within your own, the people around you, your own social groups.
And it gets out quick. It gets out quick. I mean, when you stand up for others, people know that you'll stand up for others. I mean, I went through a way station in New Mexico and had a picture of my daughter on a magnetic sticker with the Ashley Patience Project on there. And the lady running the way station, the officer, looked at that and looked up at me and she said, I know her. That's Ashley Lindsay, and her mama is Tara Woodley. I said, yeah, that's my wife.
Yeah.
And I'm in New Mexico. We're from Texas, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, these things, you don't realize how many people you're going to touch. And if you standing up causes you a problem, it really doesn't matter if it helps one child from one incident that makes them uncomfortable. You know, if it causes you a problem, I'll gladly lose my job over helping a child or over helping a young lady that's got problems. Of course,
Right.
I work for a great company. They wouldn't do that. They support, you know, any fight against trafficking. So
yeah, they are a great company. So I guess in like conclusion, kind of, I want to ask is like, so let's say the parent is doing due diligence and they do come across this in their kid's phone or something like that. And I'll start with you, Jim. What do you recommend the parent does?
very first thing you do is report it to authorities. Get the authorities involved immediately. You need to, at that point, you need to go ahead and have a serious discussion with your child. You need to listen to what the authorities say when they show up, because they're going to want to see what you discovered on their phone. They can't just take your word for it. You're going to have to save that until they can see that and then follow their instructions of what they tell you on the phone. And then the next thing you need to do is limit access to that individual with your child. Whether your child's happy about it, whether they're not happy about it, you limit their access to that person. And it doesn't matter if it's an uncle, an aunt, it doesn't matter if it's a brother or sister, it doesn't matter if it's a friend from the down the road or the pastor in your church. You cut that off. You may have found something that you thought was a problem that turns out it really wasn't. But for that time period, until you know for sure, you limit that access, you stop that access. You take that child out of the situation and you take control of the situation. Once you take control of the situation, then you better have a heart for your child. Because if your child doesn't believe that is a problem, you've got some serious counseling to do with your child. And it may take more counseling than just you can do. Get your pastor involved, get a counselor involved, government officials. I think that hotline you were mentioning before, they can give you access to different venues that can help your child. Look for every avenue you can possibly find to help them. You know, like I said before, we as men, we want to think we're so tough, nobody can do that to my child. We're not. If a predator wants your child bad enough, you may be able to stop them, but with you stopping them, you'll probably wind up in prison. And that's okay. That's an acceptable risk. But why not do it the right way and stop them with the authorities that have given us the ability, the hotline numbers, the law enforcement agencies to be able to come in and do it the right way. Because when you're doing it the right way, you're not only following our country's laws, you're following God's laws. Yes. So we need to stand up, protect our children. And those are really my two major things on the question you asked. You know, limit that access. Well, there's a couple more than two, but limit that access, have that conversation with your children, contact the authorities. Get it out there in the open. Because as I said before, the last thing somebody that's messing with your child in an inappropriate way wants is for it to be brought into the light, for people to start coming to them going, oh, you're abusing a child. These abusers, the way they get away with it is it's done in secret. It's done in the dark. It's done behind people's backs. And when the public starts identifying who they are, you see a change in their behaviors, because they'll do one of two things: either they'll back off and go somewhere else and start again with somebody else's child, or they will become totally ballistic. And you got to watch for that too.
Right.
And if I'm wrong on
Absolutely.
any of that, you can tell me, but that's the way I am. And
I hear you. And KP, what would you say if to parents out there if they find this kind of information in their phone or they suspect something is going on?
Yeah, I think Jim did a great job. It's really important to report it to the cyber tip line, and then to make sure law enforcement's involved, because these are different types of crimes. When you have children being sexually exploited, and even if it's, you know, a different kind of trafficking, if it's labor trafficking, it's still a crime. But when you're talking about the sexual exploitation of a minor, there are some really important things that need to be preserved. So if a lot of parents' natural instincts would be to delete everything off the cell phone, but you're going to need that evidence to be able to do the hashing so that the technology can find those images and track them down and get them off the internet. So those are really good tips of advice. And then I would echo what Jim and you both said, was, you know, reinforcing that love to your child, that this is not your fault. There is nothing wrong with you, because the shame associated, and I see it particularly with boys that have been trafficked, that were groomed by somebody they thought they could trust. The shame associated with having those nude images out there brings all sorts of new issues into the fray. And so I think that puts children at a higher risk for suicide. And we see a lot of these kids that have been groomed are highly susceptible to suicidal ideation and other forms of self-harm. And sadly, some have taken their lives because it was too much. And so parents, I think you just heap on those extra doses of love and really let your child know that this was not your fault. You did not do anything wrong. And let's go ahead and support them through this. Make sure that you have a wraparound approach, not just, you know, checking in on them once or twice, but it's got to be ongoing, because the data shows that, you know, once the images are out there, once the child's been exploited, that really chisels away at their identity, and you've got to really reinforce their self-worth. This is not your fault, and we love you, and we're going to get through this together. And it's not leaving that child out there on their own to try to figure it out. And it may be a little bit prickly, because we know, especially with teenagers, they may, you know, I'm fine, I got this, but don't necessarily believe the words that they say. Just really know your child, and this is so important. So I think you really did a good job of highlighting that piece of it, Jim.
This has been like a really interesting conversation. And Jim, is there anything else you'd like to add to this before we conclude?
the only thing I can add to this is that I want people to know that there's a wealth of information out there. There's a wealth of organizations that will help in these type of situations. And there is a wealth of very intelligent people that know a lot about this subject, Miss Lovejoy, that will open their hearts, their minds, their time to try to help in situations that are above what we comprehend. And some of these situations are so evil that they're pretty much uncomprehendable for the normal parent. Don't hesitate to contact others to ask for help, but ask for legitimate help. Go to accredited sources and get real, honest help. Don't just go to your neighbor only. Go to somebody that has the credentials, that's worked in this field, and seek the help that can truly make a difference in your child's life. I'm long-winded. I apologize.
That's all right. And KP, is there anything you'd like to add in conclusion that you'd like the public to know about the subject?
Yeah, I think Jim did a great job of emphasizing what I was going to say. There are so many resources out there, and it is really important to start these conversations early. One of my books I started for kids under the age of 8 to have parents start having these conversations with kids so that they can develop that internal filter. Because if the first time a child is being approached by a groomer or a trafficker, they have no idea what is happening, the likelihood that they're going to fall into the trap is increased. And so the earlier you can start talking with your children about what is appropriate sexual intimacy and these kinds of things, of course, at an age appropriate level, the better your child is going to have a chance to succeed. And then one other thing I really forgot to mention that I think is really important. We talked a lot about how a lot of the grooming for trafficking is taking place online.
Yes.
And in the case where, you're out and about and you see a homeless teen or somebody who looks like they may be vulnerable, remember this stat that usually within 48 hours of being on the street, a child will be picked up by a predator, typically for sex trafficking. So usually when a child is out on the street and they need a place to sleep or they need a meal, the trafficker is going to come along and 25% of the time they're going to say, you can stay with me if, or I'll get you a burger if, and these strings of attachments start to build that trauma bond. And so just pay attention when you're out and about. If you see a child that's on the street that looks vulnerable, say something. That whole see something, say something is really, really relevant here. So that's the last thing I would add. And thank you again so much for this awesome opportunity.
Oh, thank you. You mentioned a book. What's that book called?
Yeah, I have 2 books. I have one that's called Be Careful Little Eyes, that's written for kids under the age of 8, and it is basically helping little ones navigate the dangers lurking online. And then the second one is called A Dangerous Trap, and it goes more into the tween teenage space of helping kids understand the navigating the dangers online. And it goes a little bit into my story of how I fell into similar sexual exploitation. So it's got a lot of data, a lot of facts, and a lot of opportunities for parents and children to work together on building those safeguards.
Wonderful. Well, please give us a connection that we can put here in YouTube so that people can go and order the books, and I would love to be a part of that to help you with that. So absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. So this concludes our podcast of Through the Eyes of Survivors. So please be sure to like and subscribe to our podcast so you get notified for future upcoming episodes. And if this episode was informative, please feel free to donate to help survivors through our programs at Break the Silence. You can go to our webpage, breakthesilencedv.org. And if you need any other resources as far as mental health resources or a listening ear, Break the Silence has a support line at 1-855-287-1777. Please feel free to contact one of our support people here at the Break the Silence, and they'd love to hear from you and provide resources for you. Thank you so much.